Welcome to the Momnificent podcast. This is the place where we help parents live a happy, healthy life with their kids. We're going to show you how to connect with your child and help them even in their most difficult moments as we hear from experts in the field. I'm your host, Dr. Karin Jakubowski, an international speaker, public school principal, and former struggling student. The Momnificent podcast equips parents with science-based strategies to help you live a happy, healthy life with your kids. Welcome. Today, I'm so excited. I have Leah Hadley here with me, and listen to what she has done. She is an award-winning financial planner, a certified divorce financial analyst, and a mediator. She uses her 15 years of experience to help women make financial decisions in light of impending or past divorce. Leah, welcome to Momnificent.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited that we connected, and I'm so excited about the information that you're going to bring to our guests listening to today, and someone listening who actually might think of someone who might need this and be able to pass it on to them. Because when it comes to divorce and being a woman, there's a lot of questions. There's probably a lot of secret questions, I'll say, women
Absolutely.
have that they're like, I don't even know. I don't know. Like, how do I, navigate this? So I love that I've got some questions for you today. And as you guess, as my listeners are listening, please send us more questions because Leah and I are going to come back on to do an Instagram live, and we are here to help you. We want to answer your questions. So Leah, actually, I have a question I did not give you a look at. I can't even talk today. I did not give you this question in advance, but it's a fun one. I love it. What's something you've done recently that you haven't done for a while that just brings you joy?
Ooh, something I've done recently that just brings me joy. I'll tell you, you're asking me this at a very funny time because we've been out, we haven't had power for the last 48 hours. We had a storm come through. I'm in my office right now, which is why I'm able to do this, but at home, it hasn't been the most joyful experience.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
But no, it's fine. We will get through this. Last week we did, so the kids started school this week. I have three children. They're 11, 14, and 16. And I did a staycation the week before, so last week before they started school. And we spent one of the days, we rented a boat and spent the day on the lake, maybe like an hour and a half from where we live. And Karin, I just love being on the water, just having that time, being outside, spending time with the kids. Everybody's stuck on the boat together. So they're all there. But it was a really, really nice day. And it brought me a lot of joy.
Oh my gosh. There's something about being on the water
Yeah.
and a fire. Like it's so mesmerizing. I could just like sit and just watch it, right? For like hours. Oh my gosh. That's so beautiful. All right. So let me turn my screen on over here. That just went blank. Okay, we're going to dive right into this. What are the common mistakes most people make that cost them thousands when going through divorce? Tell us what we don't know.
Yeah, I talk about this a lot. I do a lot of speaking on this specific topic, and I usually focus around the financials, and I'll get to that in just a second. But I think if I take a step back, it actually even just starts with the way people approach a divorce itself. And a lot of times people don't even realize that there are actually many processes by which you can choose to go through with terminating a marriage. But we have this sort of movie version in our minds of going to court and ending a divorce through the court system. And the reality is actually very few marriages are ended with a judge deciding how things will be divided. That is actually a very uncommon way for ultimately a marriage to be terminated or a settlement to be finalized. And so if you take a step back, one of the first decisions that people are actually faced with when they are looking to terminate a marriage is how am I going to go about doing this. So for example, mediation is one way to work through the agreements that people need to work through in order to get to that final resolution that then gets filed with the court. That's one option. A collaborative process is one option. And so that's where each party hires a collaboratively trained attorney. They might hire a financial neutral like myself to help them work through the financial aspects. Depending on the nature of the parenting issues that exist, they may hire a parenting expert to help through some of the parenting plan issues. But essentially, it's collaborating with these professionals in order to reach that final agreement. There are negotiated settlements where the attorneys are negotiating back and forth. In my practice, I see that most commonly. But why I say that has one of the biggest financial impacts is when people do go through that litigated process, that is by far the most expensive way to go about this process. And it really sets up a very adversarial experience. And while, yes, there is no question that people are emotional, often one or both parties is very angry. There's a lot that's going on in terms of grieving, not just the relationship, but the life that people had dreamed about and thought about. And, there's a lot of change that's happening. And so there are reasons why, obviously, that people kind of go that route. But if you can take a step back, work with, either a coach or a therapist to help process some of those emotional aspects, choosing one of the processes that will save you in the divorce itself, that can save you a tremendous amount of money just on the process alone that you choose to use to get to a settlement agreement. So that's one piece of it. But when it comes to the actual financial aspects, big mistakes that people make, not considering the tax consequences of the settlements. So not looking at how can we do this in a tax efficient manner, not considering the administrative expenses associated with dividing assets. I mean, thousands upon thousands of dollars just lost in taxes and administrative expenses just because that's not where people are thinking about. They might be looking at just an asset value or just a debt, like on a balance sheet or whatever, but not really thinking about what does this actually mean in practical terms, in terms of actually dividing these things, right? And so those can be really costly mistakes. You don't fully understand the financials and the implications of those decisions.
Yeah, like what you don't know, you don't know. So
Exactly.
in our mind, we might think, oh, I just go and I fill out the papers and you just kind of go from there. But you're bringing up a really important point. Like there's money you might be losing if you don't get the right people involved who are experienced to guide you through that process.
Exactly.
Okay, that's really good to know. What is the most important step? You call it the most important step one to take to increase your financial confidence. And what do you mean by financial confidence?
Yeah, so this is different for everybody, but it is important to recognize where you are as it relates to your own financial situation, your knowledge about your financial situation, and your knowledge about managing money. And I do a lot of workshops where I illustrate all of the various subject areas that are required when it comes to money management. So there are a lot of people who feel very strong when it comes to budgeting. Fantastic, but they might feel weak when it comes to investment management or long-term goals, right? There are lots of people who are just like, I don't even know where my money goes, or I have this retirement account, I don't really understand it. So getting clear around where are those areas where you don't necessarily feel like you really fully understand, and really that's a great opportunity to learn, right? And sometimes that's picking up a book and reading, or taking a workshop or something like that. But sometimes that's working with a professional. And I think especially when people are going through a divorce, you're under time pressure, and you have a lot. People are emotionally overwhelmed. I mean, there's just a lot going on, right? There's a lot of transition. And so having somebody who can really shortcut that for you and help give you that clarity can really bolster your confidence and shortcut it for you.
Yeah, that's really good because for example, in my situation, I'm the one in our marriage who handles all the bills. I pay all the bills. I know what's coming in. I know when it's going. And then I talked to another guy recently and he's like, oh, I handle it all. Like my wife doesn't know anything about it. And that's like, you have those situations too. And what do you do when you're stepping into it and you're like, oh, great, now I have to take over this of things that you might not even, see the whole spectrum of. So
Yeah.
that's another
And I always encourage
challenge.
people, we work with people. Absolutely. My specialty is people who are going through a divorce or recently divorced, but we work with people in all kinds of situations. And there are situations where, you're married and your spouse has a major medical issue happen and you have to take over the finances immediately, or you lose your loved one, or, we see all kinds of things that happen. It is very important, regardless of your situation, that both spouses be knowledgeable about where the accounts are, money coming in, money going out. Doesn't mean they have to be, necessarily involved on a day-to-day basis, but at least that basic knowledge that if something were to happen, that they are in a situation where they could handle it. So the fact of the matter is, when these difficult life events happen, that is the most difficult time to be trying to learn these things.
Right. Because when you're in a divorce, you got the hurt, the transition, the pain, like you were saying. And then if you lose a loved one, you're in a whole emotional state where it's difficult to even think and act clearly, let alone try to navigate and figure all that out that you haven't been doing, right in the
Exactly.
financial area. So why, I think you did a great job answering the question, why would someone need a financial professional? How do you know when it's time you need one?
Yeah. So, and I'll go a little deeper into why you might need a financial professional as
Okay.
well. So, especially, one of a big piece of what you are negotiating when you're going through a divorce is a financial settlement. For most people, it will be the largest financial transaction of their entire life. So, to go through that process without financial advice doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. A lot of times people are leaning on their attorney for financial advice. The reality is, your attorney's role is to provide legal advice. Some attorneys are financially savvy, but a lot of attorneys, went into family law because they want to work with families, not necessarily because they are financial experts, right?
Right.
And so, really having that person who can look at through that financial lens at this, negotiation. What does this mean in the short term? But also, what does this mean for you long term, right? Because we get very, very short term focused when we're under a lot of stress. Like, what do I need to worry about now, right?
Right.
But it's really helpful to have that other person who's looking out for you and saying, okay, I know you're worried right now, but if you do this now, this is also what it means for your future, and have that person who's looking out for you so you're not making those decisions that are going to have negative long-term consequences. And so that is really where that financial professional can be a huge support for you through the process.
Mm.
But how do you know you need a financial professional? If you are worried about the financial decisions, if you're uncertain about the financial decisions, certainly if you need to define the marital estate. So if there's separate property, depending on the state that you live in, that definition is going to vary by state.
Good
But
point.
how do you start to negotiate it if you don't even know what the marital estate looks like, right?
Right.
And so figuring out, what does the marital estate look like? What are we talking about? So that way we know what we're negotiating, right? Spousal support is a very gray area. It's going away in some areas, but
Really?
helping you,
Wow.
absolutely, yeah,
Ooh, I haven't heard that. Ooh.
helping you to really understand, what can you afford to pay? What do you need in terms of support? What does this all look like for you? And so that way you're not getting into an agreement that is just completely undoable, right? Like, you just can't actually do. And so that's really important as well.
Mm.
So a financial
So
professional
good.
can really help with a lot of different aspects.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad you brought that up because I wouldn't think the lawyer can't give me that financial advice. Like I would just think, oh, he's been doing this so long, whatever he says kind of like would be. So I really appreciate you bringing up that importance of a financial professional in addition to your lawyer who is helping you navigate this. What are the first steps to take to prevent financial worries in a divorce? What are the things keeping a divorced woman up at night when it comes to finances?
Yeah. So I would say the biggest thing is gaining clarity. You want to know exactly when and how much income is coming in. So income, like cash flow, money coming in, how much is going out? When is it going out? How much is going out, right? And so for some people, when we talk about budget, a budget is a plan for your money. So most people really don't have a budget. As much as people talk about budgeting, I work with lots of people. Most people do not operate off of a budget. But we're really not talking about a budget. We're really talking about cash flow. So money coming in, money going out. So not what you're aspiring to, but what is actually happening.
Like
so
the actual expenses, the income and the actual expenses.
When's it coming in? How much? And where's it coming? And where's it coming from, right? But then on the asset, how much you own, what you owe, and then the liability is what you owe, right? So assets are what you own, liabilities are what you owe. Where are accounts held? How are they held? What does the type of account mean? So getting just very, very clear on your current financial situation is very, very important. Having that clarity, that initial clarity before you even start negotiating anything. I had a woman come in and she had been contemplating divorce for years. Fortunately, her husband is dealing with a pretty significant substance abuse issue. And she's very, very worried about the financial liability that she could the impact of his choices. And so she comes in, and the reason she hasn't moved forward with a divorce is because she was so worried about what could this mean for her financially. And we walked through the financial situation, and Karen, she's going to be just fine.
Wow.
Years.
And she wouldn't even know that.
She had no idea.
Right. And here she's like afraid. Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
You're just walking through that. And not everybody is. I mean, reality, right? Like some people come out of these situations in a very difficult, very precarious financial situation. But in her situation, and it's that piece, it's that clarity. And just walking through the numbers and knowing exactly what we're looking at, what is a realistic outcome. And then you deal with it, whatever that realistic outcome is, right? And so maybe it's an outcome like hers where she's going to be just fine. And she didn't have to have this weight dragging on her all these years. She could have, but maybe it's a difficult outcome, but then what steps do I need to improve it? Maybe we need to work really hard on eliminating debt. So that way, when I'm ready to move forward with a divorce, we're in a better financial situation. Maybe I need to focus on my career and look at how do I increase my income. So that way, if I do decide to move forward with a divorce, I'm in a better situation, right? Like we can be proactive and figure out ways to deal with this if we know what the issues are. But if you don't even go through the exercise to get the clarity to know what we're dealing with, then it's just kind of swirling around in your mind and you're just kind of worried about it. And then you're not taking any steps. It just is that constant stress.
Oh, this is so good. I love this. I really hope what you're saying is helping even at least one person. And like I said at the beginning, like if you're listening to this and you have a question, reach out to us. We're coming back on. We want to answer your questions. We want this to be helpful. So Leah, what's your advice for women if you're thinking about divorce, but it's too scary to think of losing the house, the car, the finances, and then so you're just frozen in fear and you don't act? I mean, it's kind of a similar situation to what you just shared. What would you say to someone listening who might be thinking that, which I'm so grateful you're here today, Leah, because I think there's women thinking this that haven't breathed it to anybody and might be in a state of frozen fear, just in their own world and feel like they're so alone. And I love that you're here to help just walk us through this and give us this information. So what are the things keeping a divorce? Oh, sorry, I asked that question. If it's scary, too scary to think of losing the house, the finances, like what does a woman what would you say to her?
Yeah. So there are a lot of things, but I'll give you an example to start with, and then we can kind of dig into it a little bit more. I just started working with this client and she tells me, sometimes people share a lot more of their personal story. They don't have to, it's entirely up to them and what their comfort level is. But in her situation, her husband had cheated for years. She's been married 30 years. He'd been cheating for decades. I mean, a long time she had been experiencing this. And she felt like she needed to share with me why she decided to move forward with a divorce now. And she said, Leah, my boys are grown. They're okay. Our business, they have a family business. Our business is in a situation that it can withstand it right now. We are in a financial situation now where I know I'm going to be okay on the other side. And so now's the time. There's no good time. It's going to disrupt your life in a lot of different ways, no matter when you do it, right? But for her, she decided, she made a decision that she kind of got her ducks in a row, and now she's ready to move forward and really focus on herself and what's most important to her, creating a life that she really loves for herself going forward.
Yeah.
And I see that honestly with a lot of people. They do. A
Oh,
lot of people wait
man.
until, their kids are settled or, what have you. For a lot of folks, it really is very important to weigh out what is most important to them. I work with a lot of people who have experienced financial abuse. That can be, situations where you just can't live through it. You just you really can't. And regardless of what it's going to take to get out, sometimes you just have to get out now, right?
Yeah.
I work with people who are in physically violent situations where it's unsafe and you have to get out now, right? But for the vast majority of people, you do have some options to decide when it's going to be right for you. And, whether that's a financial decision or emotional decision, a family decision, there's so much that goes into that decision. And figuring out what does that look like for you, right? So it's not necessarily going to be the right time when you found out just now that somebody was cheating, or just now that there was financial infidelity, or whatever happened, right? So with that being said, in terms of people who are specifically worried about the finances, I think it really is important to go through the exercise and get very clear. Now, sometimes, and we've had this happen plenty of times, where women want to go through that financial exercise of saying, where am I and what would that potential outcome look like? And we can't get the financial information because they don't have access. Well, that's financial abuse. If you don't have access to your own financial information, that is financial abuse.
Yeah.
And so, how they want to handle that, we can't subpoena records or anything if they're not actually have a case open, So how they decide, if they decide that that's the situation that they're willing to live in, that's their decision, right? But we cannot give the full information if we don't have access to it, right? And that comes up. That comes up a lot, unfortunately. I mean, that's the reality of, the space that we work in. But I would just, again, reiterate how important it is for both spouses, regardless of your marital situation, to be involved in the family finances, just, again, from a safety perspective, because anything could happen to either one of you at any time. And
Yeah.
making sure that you and your family are taken care of means that you both know where everything is, and
Exactly.
have access to that information. It's really important. So the other piece of it is, people are very attached to their lifestyle. And that's a decision. If you are very attached to your lifestyle and you know that, yeah, you're not going to be able to afford that car, or you're not going to be able to afford to stay in the home, you get to decide what's important to you. You get to make that decision. And maybe you decide that that is more important to you than, being in a relationship that, you feel like you're equal partners and you're in a happy marriage. Maybe that is something where you don't want to make that change or rock the boat. And that's fine. People make that decision every day. You get to make that decision, assuming your spouse isn't filing for divorce, right? And so you're absolutely right that that is something that people are worried about. But it's also a reality check. If your spouse has filed for divorce or you have filed for divorce, sometimes changes do have to be made. And I always tell people we're in a season. Sometimes those changes are temporary. So it doesn't necessarily mean that just because we have to downsize the house this year or next year, that you're always going to be living in, a different kind of home or something like that.
That's a good point. And a lot of accounts these days take something as simple as your phone, your Comcast, what have you. Like my husband set up an account, and then I try to call and change something, and they're like, "Oh, you're not on this account." So people need to, if you're listening to this, make sure the accounts that you have, they both have you as joint account holders, because if something happens to your spouse and they don't have the permission for you to be on there, they're not going to give you the information, which to me is just clearly not the way it should be, because you just assume, well, I'm the spouse. Of course, you're going to talk to me, and they won't even talk to you. Yeah. The spouse has to give them permission to add you. It's crazy. And it's accounts that you wouldn't even think that would be that important. And they do that.
If that person ends up in the hospital, if they're incapacitated, you don't have access to your own stuff. I had a woman come into the office, God bless her. She says, "Leah, I feel like a $2 million bag lady. I can't access my money." Her husband had passed away.
Yes.
and she has significant wealth, but we had to jump through hoops for her to be able to get access to it.
Yeah, it's crazy. So don't assume because you have an account, you have access to it because it's you and your spouse. Like that was just, yeah, that's a very important piece. What are few, I know you say you have 7 things you need to consider and determine to keep your house in a divorce. Maybe just touch on a few right now.
Yeah, so we have a 7-step exercise that we walk people through. But the big thing is, and this is really important, the house is in some families the largest asset that people have. It's very commonly the largest asset. It's important to know how much that house is worth, Karen. And so often people are like, well, I think it's about, or
Oh, they don't know.
they look at Zillow, or they talk to a realtor or what have you. So the investment in an appraisal, it's not that big an investment relative to the value of most people's homes. It is well worth it to have a reasonable number to use when you are negotiating the value of the house. So first and foremost, if you're going to negotiate around the house, have a value that you can really rely on. I think that's really important. Especially, we work with folks all over the country, but people out in California, big house values, like make sure you know how much your home is worth. So that is really important. A lot of times people are kind of hesitant to invest in that appraisal, but really big picture, they're not that expensive. And the values on Zillow and some of those other sites can be way off from the actual value. So first and foremost, know what we're actually talking about. Know what the mortgage balance is and what the terms of the mortgage are. Whose name is on the mortgage? Are both parties' names on the mortgage? If both parties' names are on the mortgage, some mortgages have an assumption of liability clause that allows you to maintain the existing mortgage. A lot of people have amazing interest rates on their existing mortgages. They got those mortgages when interest rates were still like 2.5%, 3.5%, maybe 4%. If you're refinancing now, depending on when you're watching this, you might be looking at something more in the 7% range. So more than double in a lot of cases. So if you could assume that liability, keep the existing mortgage intact, that can be incredibly beneficial, but you got to do some research and find out, number one, does that clause exist within the existing mortgage? And if so, what are the requirements in order to be able to assume it? Because just because the assumption of liability is available under that mortgage doesn't mean that you have the income to actually be able to assume the liability. So that's really important to not negotiate around the house terms that you can't actually fulfill, which does happen. And so if you have to refinance the house, get really clear on what is that payment actually going to look like. Sometimes people offset the equity, the value of what they actually own in the house. So if we take the value of the home, we subtract the mortgage, that's going to give you your equity in the home. That typically, depending on where you live, essentially gets divided in half between the parties. Sometimes people have other assets to offset. So let's say I'm keeping the home and Karen, you're keeping additional investments in order to offset that value. But for some people, they actually need to get that refinance to get cash to pay out the other spouse. So they're taking on additional debt in order to be able to do that. Now, sometimes they might be able to extend out the terms of their mortgage in order to be able to lower that payment, especially with the higher interest rates. But sometimes, it just depends. But you want to know, what are we looking at in terms of what is that payment going to be? Now, if you're in a situation where we're not dealing with a mortgage, that's fantastic. It certainly makes things a lot easier. But unfortunately, that's just not most people's situation, right? And so getting very clear on the actual payment. A lot of times people will say to me, Karen, well, if I rent in my area isn't going to be any cheaper than the mortgage. Well, that very well may be true if that is all we are looking at. But you really want to fully understand the cost of maintaining that home. So what are the utility costs every month? What are the maintenance costs of the home? Are there any big investments you need to make in order to be able to keep the home? Really dig into the numbers and fully understand what are we looking at in order to be able to actually stay in the home, and what are we giving up in terms of other assets, right? And so it's a bigger discussion. We actually have a workshop, a full 1-hour workshop where we're going to be walking through, because this is a big issue for people.
Yeah, I think it might be one of the things that holds people up from like, oh, I don't want to lose the house. I don't want to step into this. And then they don't know. So the fear grips them to freeze and do nothing. And like you're saying, being informed, then you can know where you're at to make the decisions you want to choose to do.
Mhm.
Yeah, so good. All right, so those listening, I'm going to have Leah back on Instagram Live because she's going to help us with money when it comes to your kids, which send us your questions because I can't wait to have that interview. So, Leah, to finish out today, what's the best advice someone ever said you gave them?
I love this question.
I do too. I just totally came up with that. I love that. What's the best advice someone ever said? Leah, thank you for telling me that.
It has to do with the way we think about money. And my
Okay.
big thing is that I talk to people about money is that money is a tool. And we want to sharpen our ability to use that tool well. A lot of times people give money power. Money doesn't have any power, money doesn't have emotion. It is a tool that we use to exchange value. And when we learn to use it well, it's a very empowering experience. And so allowing yourself to learn to use that tool well can serve you for the rest of your life.
That's beautiful. And before we end, I don't know if I told you that I'm a master certified life coach
Oh, no.
on the side from being a principal. Well, I actually went through the whole course for my own self where I kind of hit rock bottom on my own, trying to keep all the balls in the air and just really struggling in ways and how I even saw myself and how I showed up, my confidence and self-esteem. And I just want to insert that here for anyone listening, because if you're in a position where you are feeling the negative emotions and the anger and you can't get, it's hard for you to get past those emotions, or you're just like at night fuming and you just can't, it keeps you up at night. There's a process and a system that I can help you with to release you from that negative emotion, because you need to be set free from that to get to Leah's help. Because otherwise the anger, you're not going to see things clearly like you would when you're in a calm moment. So just throwing that out there, because I haven't been like telling people a lot that I started doing this, but I've been practicing it with even my own teachers in school, even with the students. This is crazy. The little girl was upset at the other kids in the class, and we did this little practice, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, like I feel so much better. Thank you for that." So there's ways to lift you out of that negative space so that you're in a healthy mental headspace, to hear from Leah what she's saying, to think logically and clearly so you make the decisions you want and you don't make them out of the pain, the hurt, and the negative emotion, right? Because we all know that nothing ever comes good out of when we're making those decisions, right? When we're like emotionally elevated. So, Leah, thank you so much for joining me today. How can someone find and follow you?
It has been my absolute pleasure, and you can absolutely join me for that free workshop about the
Oh,
marital
awesome.
home. So that is happening September 6th. You can learn about that on our
Great.
website, greatlakesdfs.com. And we do have a free Facebook group. It is called Watch Her Thrive.
Oh, I
And
love
then on
that.
Instagram, I am Watch Her Thrive as well.
Watch her thrive. I love that. And I'll throw that link in the description notes here for anybody interested. Leah, thank you so much. And we'll see you soon on Instagram Live. Can't wait.
That's all we've got for this episode of the Momnificent podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would be honored if you would subscribe and rate if you really liked it. I know wherever you're listening right now, it might not be the best time to leave a comment, but feel free to leave a question, a review, or a comment at any time. And until next time, remember, don't worry, be happy.